after that lovely introduction, I think we can just stop there because quit whilst I'm ahead. Well, what would your life be like if you could see into the future when you were making important decisions in your life? What would your investments be if you knew that they were always going to be successful? But more importantly, as therapists, what would we give to be able to get right down to the client's deepest level of consciousness and reprogram any sabotaging beliefs and programming? Now, how would you like to hear your inner truth spoken by your own voice? Sometimes very surprising, maybe. Reverse speech makes all this seeming science fiction actually science fact. We can look into the future right here, right now. Somebody here in the audience told me in her reversals that in a year's time she would be completely cured. So much so that when her consultant said to her, "What idiot gave you the diagnosis of inoperable brain cysts?" she was able to say, "You did, doctor." Yep. It's things like that that really set me alight. So what I'd like to do first of all is to give you a little bit about myself. I won't be as glowing as Jane.
Why not?
But it'll give you an idea of how I came to reverse speech. And also why I'm so lit up about it, and how I use it with my clients who can afford it. It's not cheap because it involves a lot of work on the part of the practitioner. But it's such a revolutionary process that at the end of it, the stated goals of the client are met. Let me just play you and hope these are new speakers, especially for you folks. So it was good in my consulting room, but let's hope it's going to work here. If not, we might as well log home. Okay, let's.
You don't feel that there are any loose ends?
Can you all hear?
Or do you? No. It's good, isn't it?
Oh, it's already there, come on.
You've got fun, you've got love, you've got great family, and the business is fine. I would love, if I have your permission, to quote some of this work.
Sure.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Because, it's just such a happily ever after sort of one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's been very strong. It's been these very instant results.
Yeah. Sometimes results take a while to happen.
You mean in the outside kind of world?
In the outside, in outside manifestations.
Yes. But kind of internal, I feel.
But yeah.
giving me some direction.
Yeah. And it just feels really, almost before we started, it feels as if you just took off like a rocket.
Yeah. It was clear, that's the word that I really, and like, I think I said to you after the first session, the second session was like coming back home. Like it's kind of like you lose yourself, don't you, sometimes?
Yeah. Lose touch with yourself.
Yeah, I think being mum as well, kind of, it's inevitable. Well, maybe it's not inevitable, but it's a lot that you, it's a very giving kind of role, so you're not just giving much to yourself. So I've been doing quite a lot of that recently.
Yes. Excellent. Well, that's a good time to put this on pause.
Right, this is a young woman who has been in a stable relationship. I say stable, it's been up and down for a decade. And they have two beautiful little children to prove it. Because of her problems with her family of origin, her attitude to marriage was dodgy, to say the least. And at the end of this, they're getting married. So that's lovely. We have so many stories. In a way, I just plucked this one out of my caseload to show you. And I'll be playing one or two of her reversals for you at the end, if we've got time. And if Princess Diana, the Queen, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton's reversals don't take me too long to get through, I'll happily talk about other things. Oh yes, I forgot to say that reverse speech not only is a marvellous therapeutic tool, fundamentally important therapeutic tool, an amazing discovery by a man who deserves the Nobel Prize and instead has had a few assassination attempts for his troubles. But it's also great fun when you have this gladiatorial debating going on. Okay, so now let's see if I can wave a magic wand of.
What is reverse speech?
I'm going to tell you that.
Good.
You're going to have to wait. I'm going to be Scheherazade and keep you guessing. This is a face that certainly people of my generation will recognise. John Lennon. And this marvellous quote, which I felt was very apt for two reasons. One, because he was instrumental in getting reverse speech off the ground, but also because it speaks very much to the heart of reverse speech. And this is where he says, being honest may not get you a lot of friends, but it'll always get you the right ones. So, as you have heard, I've been in the business of psychology for many years. Actually, I graduated in 1965, quite a long time ago. And so there's very little that happens in my consulting room that I haven't heard before. You know, oh, here we go again. And I have to keep on telling myself that this is unique to the person involved. Okay? But basically, life boils down to this marvellous maxim. Birth, in between stuff, death. Of course then, there's the afterlife, but we won't go into that right now. I have always had a feeling that there was more I could do than just therapeutic work. That there was something beyond therapy. And so, I was looking for all sorts of ways to open doors for my clients. I wanted to give them the keys to their own success, how they defined their success themselves, and how to allow them the joy of discovery. Now, if we're lucky in our careers, sometimes a magic moment happens, and then you're able to give this to your clients. You distill it, you process it, you give it to your clients. I'll talk about that in a minute. If you're very, very lucky, you have more than one of those moments. My first moment was down to a lovely new client in my new practice. I'll talk about that too. And my cat, both of whom were far, far wiser than I was. And so, these moments do allow you to bring peace of mind and, dare I say it, happiness to your clients. You let them discover their own happiness. Now, happiness didn't always have the good press that it has these days in psychology. We're now calling it positive psychology, which is a lovely way of describing it. And a delightful man called Robert Holden. Has anybody ever heard of Robert? He's a lovely person. He was the first psychologist to set up a happiness clinic. He set it up many decades ago now in Birmingham, and of course I suppose that's exactly where you need happiness clinics. Dare I say it? Okay. He will stand up in any group and say, "My name is Robert Holden and I am a recovering psychologist." And he's right. So, from his very first book, called Laughter, the Best Medicine, I found a beautiful excerpt, which really chimed with how I understood my work. As a psychologist, I had originally been trained as a problem spotter. In fact, initially, I prided myself on how good I was at being able to spot people's weaknesses, neuroses, fears, hang-ups. You see, I really wanted to be a good psychologist, and as everyone knows, a really good psychologist is someone who can always find more wrong with you than the average psychologist. My original training, therefore, was to spot the problem that you had, that you were going to tell me about, to spot the problem that you had, that you were not going to tell me about, and to spot the problem that you had, that you didn't even know about yet. That's how creative psychology can be. You come in with a few minor problems and you leave with some major ones. Over time, I began to have a change of heart. I began to realize, oops, I began to realize you know what I said about IT? That
Can
the
you
real
use the
psychologist...
arrow down? It might go smoothly. At
This one
the
down?
keyboard. You can use them.
Yeah. Ahaha. Oh,
See, try that.
no, you see it's
It goes a page down.
Just say it.
It goes a page up and a page
What
down.
do
Yeah.
you realise in
No,
this?
I realised that the real job was to connect, to reconnect the clients to their light. And I think people here in this room understand exactly what I mean. Okay. So, I've been flashing backwards and forwards with this, which reminds me of the time when I was consultant educational psychologist in the ILEA, the Inner London Education Authority, of blessed memory, and in a supreme act of political vandalism, the administration of the time abolished the authority, and I took voluntary redundancy there, and I went home to cuddle my cats and my husband, of course. Second, yes, so long as you know when you come in the pecking order or the purring order. Let me introduce you to Moonbeam and her daughter Zizzy, two Siamese, mother and daughter.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do you actually bring your cats with you when you're lecturing at all? No. And the other teacher at school always brought a dog in, and that changed the whole atmosphere. It was quite extraordinary.
I would imagine so. They are brilliant healers, but they would freak out. They don't like
Really?
travelling.
Okay.
Well, these two, they're in the spirit world, so they're probably here with us.
Oh, I see.
already.
Oh,
So,
I don't know, right.
yeah, that would be lovely. That would be great. I set up my own consultancy, and at that time I hadn't as yet got to the lofty heights of Harley Street. I was working from my own front room, and a lovely young woman was referred to me by an ex-colleague. She came in, and this little cat was, according to the vet, was dying of kidney failure. The vet had said, look, a week or two and the quality of life will become intolerable. Bring her in and we'll end it. I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. Neither did the cat. And when this young woman walked into my consulting room, she woke up, she shouted, she followed us, sat on my client's knee and started shouting up her nose, telling her all about it. And she said, something's the matter with the cat, have you taken her to the vets? And I said, yes. And she said, do you mind if I work on her whilst we talk? She was, of course, a spiritual healer. And over many sessions, she mended my cat until the cat was absolutely fine. much to the surprise of the vet and to me, but not to the surprise of the cat or my client. My client persuaded me to stop being a psychologist as such. Well, actually what she said was, stop fiddling around on the surface with words and get on with it. So I did, but that's another story and I won't go into that. Okay, so there I was with energy, healthcare, with spiritual energy, and getting with a conversation, allowing my clients to make sense of the recovery that was taking place. Does anybody recognise this man? Lovely face.
That's not young, is it?
It is,
Yeah.
yes. He had a much more spiritual approach. Carl Gustav Jung.
Oh, you, yeah.
He had a much more spiritual approach than Freud, with whom he worked for a while as colleagues. Now, you probably, none of you have seen this man.
Can't see it clearly.
This man, his name is David Oakes, David John Oakes. And he's the founder of Reverse Speech. And he stands on Carl Gustav Jung's shoulders. He works with the ideas of the deep unconscious, the collective unconscious, and how we represent things in metaphors and archetypes. But rather than leaving it to the guesswork of the therapist, he has developed a technology based on some really profound realizations that he has made. So, as I say, I've been a psychologist for over 50 years, and so when somebody says to me, I found this marvelous new therapy, I say, yeah. Okay, prove it. And being on the media panel of the British Psychological Society, I know that that people not in the field of mental health think that some basic psychological truths are really interesting, because when I'm interviewed by journalists and they ask me about various aspects of behaviour, and I just talk about the usual sort of motivations that we humans are prey to. Quite often their response is, oh wow, oh that's so interesting, oh wow. And I think, well, no, it's okay, but it's psychology, it's human interaction, it's the search for love and recognition and satisfaction. And so when a very lovely friend of mine, and here she is, Francesca, oh dear, she looks quite dark there, doesn't she? Sorry. Emailed me one day and said, Ingrid, you've got to come. I've met some people who have discovered really revolutionary technology, therapeutic technology that will shake the world. And I thought, okay, but I've had to go over my 50-odd years, very odd years, to conferences, symposia, workshops, all sorts, because for our practicing certificates in the various different disciplines that I use, you have to do, I'm sure you all know about CPD, continuous professional development. In psychology alone, I have to spend 40 hours each year listening to people reinvent the wheel. But there you go. So I wasn't going to take this email terribly seriously. I was about to say, well, I'm a bit busy, but hey, let's have a coffee and, you know, catch up what's been happening in your life. But two things in her email caught my attention, and it was nothing to do with the technology. One, she said, a free lunch will be provided during the presentation. I was interested, medium interested. And then she said, and the presentation will take place at the house of one of the group, of this group of people, and that's what clinched it for me. The Bishop's Avenue. Billionaires Road. Now, we live in Muswell Hill, and I've been, how many times, I can't tell you how many times I drive past up and down Bishop's Avenue. These absolute palaces, these magical villas. And I've always thought to myself, oh, I wish I could see inside one of those houses. That is the only reason, and I've told David, I've confessed to him, that's the only reason that I actually decided to go. And by the way, the lunch was delicious. Okay, change of scene. A young man, an entrepreneur, quite an ambitious entrepreneur, seen here with a friend, grew up in a little house in Ilford with his mum and dad, was a very good pupil at school, went to university and was reading engineering. Can't remember exactly what kind of engineering, but every engineering degree involves a hell of a lot of slog. And a friend of, this is Raj, by the way, a friend of his gave him a book whilst he was at university, and it was the Napoleon Hill book, which was the precursor of the attraction, the law of attraction. It was called Think and Grow Rich. And Raj thought to himself, if all I have to do is think I'm rich and I'll become rich, what am I doing bashing my brains out doing engineering? So he dropped out of university, got himself a job in sales, earned lots of commission, and then he thought to himself, what am I doing earning money for somebody else? And he started building his own businesses. He was so sure about the power of Think and Grow Rich that every morning he would say to himself, I'm a millionaire. I am a millionaire. I'm a millionaire. And sure enough, he was doing really well. So he began to research. He researched the things like the Secret. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about The Secret. What the Bleep interested him enormously. And his researches eventually led him to my dear friend, David, who was beavering away very, very quietly in Adelaide, in Australia, getting success after success with his clients, but keeping a very low profile. Now, there's a very good reason for him keeping a very low profile. So, bear with me. Or as that lovely character in Miranda says, bear with, bear with. He came to the attention of this gentleman here, John Grinder. How many of you have heard of neuro-linguistic programming? Excellent. It's a beautiful way of opening communication channels, both verbally and non-verbally, so that you can really connect with the other person. And as a therapist, it's a marvellous skill to be able to have in your tool bag. John Grinder began talking a lot about David. But David, although he was using reverse speech, was keeping really quiet. Okay, now I want to take you to the man at the beginning of these images, John Lennon. Okay, so we're doing a little bit of a backtrack. He was an amazingly creative musician and wanted the sound of the human voice without language. He just wanted the voice as an instrument to lay down as a backing track on either the White Album or Abbey Road album. I can't remember which, sorry, I should really look it up. And so he did, he used a technique that was called backward masking. Has anybody heard of backward masking? It's quite...
John Lennon's music, and people played certain tracks in reverse, and it had a sort of occult message, like...
Well, the subliminal thing.
Devil.
That's right, there was a whole scandal.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Lennon reversed some spoken words and laid them down as an instrument, as a verbal instrument, at the backing of one of the tracks. Because he was John Lennon of the Beatles, all the other bands of the day began to think, we can do backward masking as well. So everybody, all the boys in bands, all started doing backward masking. And they said to their fan club members, if you play our records backwards, you will hear a secret message from us. And it was something like Merry Christmas or Happy Easter or whatever. So that was intentional reversal, backward masking. You say something forwards, you say a message forwards, you reverse it, and you get a lot of gobbledygook. Now, in the process of playing the records backwards, the fan club members were hearing not only the intentionally backward masked messages, but also unintentional messages, or not messages, statements, that were embedded in the lyrics. Not the sort of stuff that is like a projective test, what we call a projective test in psychology, where you give somebody a Rorschach blot, for instance, and they say, oh yes, well I can see that's something like that. Or if you hear white noise, if you listen to the ocean, you can hear whatever you like to project into that. No, these were absolutely accurate statements in and between the gobbledygook. Now, because the boys in the bands were into drugs and were playing around with things that they thought terribly cool, but in fact were very dangerous, things like Satanism and all that gothic stuff, the reversals, the unintentional reversals that the youngsters were picking up were pretty dark. And this, as James said, got the preachers in the Bible Belt in the States and the Midwest very exercised, and they started saying from their pulpits, do not let your children listen to pop music. It's the work of the devil. Now, what do teenagers want to hear?
Come on.
Great, let's go, let's listen to it. Okay. So that's another scene. I'm going again to another part of the story. David, son of a Methodist minister, David is a very spiritual man, very ethical man, very spiritual. He felt he was here on this earth to do something. He had a task to do. He didn't didn't know what it was. At the time he was in social work, he was running a day centre for disturbed adolescent boys. He didn't know what it was, what his calling was, what in Hindu ideas you call it dharma. He had no idea, but he knew there was something that he had to do. So he decided to take a fortnight off work, and he would go and have a retreat where he fasted and he meditated and he prayed and all the sort of retreaty sort of things that you do in a retreat. And at the end of the fortnight, nothing. So he thought, well, that was a bit of a waste of time, went home, and he had a couple of weeks' work to catch up on. He was rushing around trying to do loads of things at once. And he was getting ready for a meeting, and he was dictating notes into a little Walkman sort of thing. In the process, in his bathroom, dropped the recording machine in the loo, swore a lot, fished it out, rinsed it, hairdryer, stuffed it in his pocket, went off to his meeting. When he came back, it wouldn't play. Now, David is a bit of a geek, always has been. He loves machines and stuff. So he took the recorder apart, washed it all again, dried it all again, and rewired it. Now, when he rewired it, he made a mistake. And that mistake was that he had created a machine that would only play backwards. He'd wired it up incorrectly, or so he thought. So he just shelved it and went about. Shortly, the children in the day centre were all abuzz with the ideas from the States. I would say today that it had gone viral, that if you play pop music, you get messages. And so he said, well, I've got a machine that will only play backwards. And he dug it out, dusted it off, and gave them the machine to play with. And as he and the boys were listening, he began to hear unintentional reversals. And he became fascinated. He became very excited about it, and he began to play everything backwards. He began to record his business meetings and play them backwards. And he began to record, very unwisely, he began to record his conversation with his friends and his soon-to-be ex-wife. Exactly. But at least it left him more time to develop reverse speech. And he then came to the realization, one, that language is bi-directional. We speak forwards, we think forwards, but we also think in reverse. Our entirety of our consciousness is so much greater than we could ever imagine. And we configure our words so that we also speak in reverse, embedded in our forward speech. He went on further, the more and more he did this, to realize that, and this is where the immense usefulness of this technique comes in, that the reversals had a direct complementarity to what was being said on the conscious level. And then he understood that when the complementarity was congruent, that is, when what you were thinking at that deep level, at the deepest possible level, was also roughly what you were saying at the conscious level, then your life flowed effortlessly. If, on the other hand, you were saying one thing, but deep down you were programmed to sabotage yourself, then however much you struggled, however much you worked at it, however much you tried, you would not achieve your goals. One woman that I'm working with at the moment has come to me saying, I would really like to meet a nice person. All I seem to meet are bad boys. And in her reversals, she says all sorts of things about men that we are reprogramming. It's a work in progress. And she's going to, I hope, be very happily ever after very soon. So, because of John Grinder's excitement and spreading the word of reverse speech, sometimes giving credit to David, sometimes accidentally forgetting to give credit where credit was due. But nevertheless, he was encouraged by the reception that reverse speech got to leave his homeland of Australia and head for the States, where he established a practice. He became very famous. Australia doesn't have a great tradition of therapy. On the other hand, the States has an immense culture of therapeutic work. And so he found himself being interviewed from coast to coast. Eventually he had his own radio show, which he now has again. The world is very small now. And he was even interviewed by this gentleman. So you see, he was quite big potatoes. Larry King doesn't fish out non-entities. He just goes for the top. So, having such celebrity, he also was approached by the faceless folk in the CIA, who realized that torturing people might be a lot of fun, but it's not exactly as accurate as you can get by just a recorded conversation. So he had a couple of meetings, 2 or 3 meetings with agents of the CIA. Luckily, because David is a very nice man, I think those who have met him would agree. Yeah? He made friends with some of the agents. Having made friends with some of the agents saved his life, because there were times when he really needed friends. He had quite a few fire bombings of his premises. In one of the occasions, the 2 nearest fire stations had both accidentally that day sent their one and only fire engine for servicing. Isn't that a surprise, a coincidence? And by the time the 3rd farthest engine came along, the house was gutted. He had been in the process of, he'd been in the middle of a session with a client. He'd left the tape recorder running because they just dropped everything and went out. His secretary had come in and said, "David, the house is on fire." And they just fled. When he came back, the outer casing was melted, but the tape inside was intact and could be played. And after you hear his secretary coming in and shouting that the house is on fire, we've got to get out, there are a couple of men's voices, and there are filing cabinets being opened and closed. until one of them says to the other, come on, it's getting too dangerous, we better get out. He had another I was going to tell you about the usefulness, because one day a phone rang, he picked up his phone and the man's voice said, you're going to be out tomorrow afternoon. David said, no, I'm not. The man said, you're going to be out tomorrow afternoon, put the phone down. In view of the fire bombings, David thought, I'd better be out tomorrow afternoon. When he returned, his door was broken in and there were bullets embedded in every wall of every room in his house. I've not told you about this, have I? No? Yeah. Yeah, I told you. That's why I just stick to therapy. Because David was posting, it was about 30 years ago, the internet was just new, and he was making his own, he was building his own website, and he was posting reversals that he'd found on prominent people. Who are prominent people? Celebrities and politicians. And, you know, if the President of the United States is, because he was only using recorded speeches that were out there in the public domain, if a President of the United States, one Mr. George W., was talking about looking forward to working with the Congress on a particular bill, and his reversal in that sequence says, choke the fuckers now, he's not too happy about that being known. Also, he's talking about working with the Senate on something, and his reversal is Senate, they're all first-year losers. So David was considered quite a dangerous man. By this stage, by the way, David had devised, he's a hypnotherapist, and he devised his own style of hypnotherapy. It's a very specialised style of hypnotherapy. Okay, to go back, those are the background bits that I wanted to set in place. As an educational psychologist, I know that children quite often get very confused about directions, the direction in which they write. They might start at the bottom of the page, they might start at the top of the page, they might start at the left, they might start at the right. And we teach them that our co-created way of recording speech in written form is to start at the top, left hand, and go in a line to the right. And when we've got there, and we want to do some more, we go underneath it and underneath it. But that isn't the only way of recording speech in written form. In modern day Hebrew, in Ingrid, yes, they start at the top, but they start at the right and they go to the left. In Chinese, vertical columns, Japanese vertical columns. I don't think we've ever found one that goes diagonally, but I live in hope. So here again, I know that we have to teach children about the direction in terms of written language. When a child is learning to read, some children just pick it up and take to it like ducks to water, but I know, having taught all stages of ability, that you have to really teach some children how to read. You have to teach them what the concept of first means. What is the first sound that you hear? What is the last sound? And then the verb in the middle of the monosyllabic word. So for me, hearing about all this bi-directionality, I thought, well, yes, of course, that makes so much sense. I'd like to talk a little about Candice Pert, the late great Candice Pert, whose book Molecules of Emotion, I think every therapist, every doctor, every psychologist should be should have on their reading list. She discovered that on every cell membrane in the body there were things called receptors. Then the race was on to find what they were there to receive, and Aberdeen, I think it was, somewhere in Scotland, pipped her to the post to find that the receptors received endorphins. Endorphins, the messenger molecules, the protein strings that react with the receptors, and the biological reaction that takes place, the biochemical reaction, releases energy. That energy informs the nucleus of the cell. Reverse speech goes to that energy and also informs the energy of the cells. We work at the cellular level. By the way, something that I found fascinating was when Candice Pert in her laboratory was mapping the greatest clusters of where the receptors appeared. She found that it corresponded exactly to the chakras. Isn't that lovely? Lots of people have been working with energy and have been bringing new understandings to energy. Here again, we've just last year, I think it was, that he died, Dr. Masaru. Amazing, talking about how energy can change the structure of water molecules. Here is ice crystals frozen from severely polluted water. And then Masaru prayed over the water, thawed it, prayed over it, blessed it, refroze it, and lo and behold, a beautiful ice crystal formation. In Candice Pert's laboratory, she was proving that the energy of love, gratitude, and forgiveness informed the cell to be healthy. Masaru shows us that we're made up of what, 80% water, our bodies? Shows us that the optimal state is when our thoughts inform the structure of our bodies. All these things are beginning to come together now, I hope, for you. And then this led us to the marvellous new biology of epigenetics. Epi being above genetics. Above genetics. We are not the slaves of our genes. If a client sits there and says, oh well, all my family members have cancer, have all died of cancer, so what chance do I have? Genes, the DNA double helix is just a blueprint, and it is our emotional information that decides what part of that double helix we lock or unlock. So I'm hoping that this will begin to give you an idea of the effect of reverse speech, the mechanisms by which reverse speech transforms people's lives. I want to play you a little bit about Princess Diana's reversals in that famous interview. I've mentioned President Bush, but we'll move on from him. very dear client who's here today, and I'm sure you will notice the very different, the transformation from this to the lovely woman you see at the back. Margaret was self-medicating, as you can see, for quite a while.
What a large glass.
Large glasses of medication. And she's a lovely example of reverse speech.
Absolutely.
And delighted. Thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you.
So what does... Oh, this was... Yes, I won't go that. And just thought I'd throw that one in the computer. Now, reverse speech. We take recordings of our interviews with clients. We work on them for hours and hours and hours and hours, picking out of all the gobbledygook the reversals. We discuss with our clients how they feel we're going to remedy them. And so what we're doing is we're talking to the client, but we're talking to the deep unconscious, because the client has to sit down to their deep unconscious to answer the question, how are we going to sort this out? Then we give them a couple of hypno-therapeutic sessions. One taking them into a light trance, the second taking them deeper. The second one helping them to rewrite the sabotaging patterns that quite often they had no idea that they were carrying. That at some stage in their life, in their young life, had been a very useful way of being able to survive and get by, but in later life being actually counterproductive. Once the sabotaging metaphors are collapsed, and then the programming is rewritten, then, as you heard with the client at the beginning of this evening, she came to me, a young mum, struggling with her business, struggling with her relationship, not having any fun in her life, and in a couple of months, because the reverse speech round takes 8 sessions. So in 8 weeks, she was having loads of fun. She was happily getting married, and she wants me to officiate at the wedding. Her business was just taking off. She was having the best results in her shop that she'd ever had. And she was pretty pleased with me and pleased with herself, which is what every therapist wants. So, has anybody heard of Larry Dossey? Dr. Dossey? Yeah, lovely man. He says, I've recently become aware of the groundbreaking work of Mr. David Oates in the field of reverse speech. This is a form of communication lying completely outside conscious awareness. If it's validated, as I expect it will be, after examining the evidence thus far, this discovery may prove to be of Nobel caliber. It is rare that a truly novel, creative, and profoundly important discovery is made in the field of human communication. These events are unusual, only a few in any century. Mr. Oates' stunning findings seem to fall into this category. while one's enthusiasm must be restrained, as this idea is carefully elaborated and validated, it is difficult not to sense the excitement that is gathering around his unique work. John Grinder, who I've mentioned before, says David is at this point entirely satisfied that he has many, many examples to demonstrate the phenomena. The notion that language can carry extra secondary and tertiary messages as well as the overt manifest content is well known to many of you who studied the works of Dr. Erickson, where double and triple messages are the standard practice in such a device. Erickson, one of the granddaddies of hypnotherapy. There are lots of lovely quotes. As Eric played back some famous speeches, you could hear audible gasps of reckoning. Oh, shall I play you some speeches? Why not? Why not? Let's do that. Okay, let's go to some speeches. Now, what I've done is I've put them all on one MP4. So you will hear the voices of Diana, of the Queen, of the presidential candidates. Okay? Fasten your seatbelts.
I was the first person ever to be in this family who ever had depression or was ever openly tearful. And obviously that was daunting because if you've never seen it before, how do you support it? And he's so angry.
And he's so angry.
And he's so angry. And he's so angry.
Did you all hear that? And he's so angry.
Down a bit, yeah. Up. On the laptop, it might be loud on the laptop. Up a bit. It's from the source. Volume.
Take it down here.
The volume, yeah. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that can come up. To replay.
I was the first person ever to be in this family who ever had depression or was ever openly tearful. And obviously that was daunting because if you've never seen it before, how do you support it? And he's so angry. And he's so angry. And he's so angry.
Oh dear. I'm going to see if I
It's reverse speak back.
Go on to Clinton and Trump, you're probably they're coming
Yes.
loud and clear, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm going to see if I can connect to the internet here.
No.
Yeah, I'm not connected to the internet. I think the technical term is bugger. Okay, let's see if I can give you some. The brain waves changed exactly at the point of the reversals. So we listen to each other's reversals. We're not aware that we do, but we connect at a deep unconscious level. Now, with talking about the deep unconscious, sorry, I'll come back to the politicians in a minute, and the link to the work of Carl Gustav Jung, the collective unconscious is a domain where there is no such thing as time. And because the time dimension does not exist in the cosmic soup, the cosmic consciousness, the universal mind, however people have thought to describe it, we can link in to that and sift out advice to ourselves from the future. Because I haven't got any of your reversals, we're going to just take you as a special treat along the way and see how you like the experience of the relaxation and the images and the metaphors. In this, you will meet the wolf, your hunter and protector, the aspect of your psyche. You'll meet the eagle, the metaphor, another metaphor that's very important in reverse speech, representing your intuition, your ability to sail above and see the way ahead. Okay? Is anybody not happy about going ahead with this? Okay. Okay. I'd like you to get yourselves really comfortable now.
Shall we have the lights dimmed a bit?
If you like.
Well, it's up to you. I mean, if we're going to be meditating.
If it's more relaxing, then by
Yeah.
all means. Can we?
Right, there's a switch.
Yeah, I think it's...
Is it this one?
No, not that's too much.
One side only.
One side.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like you to get yourselves really comfortable. Close your eyes and just begin to relax. And as you relax now, I would like you to imagine that with each breath in, you are breathing in new life. And with each breath out, you are breathing out the old. So we're creating a cycle of breathing here, new life in, followed by old life out. New life in, followed by old life. Excellent. And as you breathe, we're going to imagine that the outside world is beginning to fade away completely, so that the only thing that's important now is you sitting comfortably and listening to the sound of my voice, allowing the conscious mind the opportunity gradually to slow down now, function by function, step by step, so that the unconscious mind can now begin to rise to the surface. Excellent. Each breath that you take, each sound that I make, allowing the state of your relaxation to grow and expand. All right, we're doing just great. Now, to continue this process, I'm going to give you a series of exercises that will allow your body and conscious mind the opportunity to completely relax, because as your conscious mind relaxes, so too can the unconscious mind continue to rise to the surface. And the first thing that I would like you to do is concentrate all your attention onto your forehead. Just imagine that your forehead is the most predominant part of your body. And as you concentrate on your forehead, I would like you to imagine that you can feel 3 tendons or muscles stretched very tightly across the surface of the forehead, between the left and right temples. And these muscles are stretched very tightly because of all the stress and tension of the day and the week. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to count backwards from 3 down to 1. And as I count, I want you to imagine that each tendon or muscle is beginning to relax. And as each muscle relaxes, the conscious mind relaxes even more, and the deep unconscious mind rises to the surface more. Each breath that you take, each sound that I make, allowing the process of relaxation to grow even more and expand even more. And I'm going to begin now with the count of 3. And the first tendon relaxes like a rubber band that was once stretched tight. It now begins to hang loose, and we now count down to 2. The second tendon relaxes, the conscious mind going on standby even more, the world of the unconscious rising completely to the surface now. Tension and anxiety draining out of your body and mind. The chair upon which you're sitting acting as a sponge, soaking up any excess tension and anxiety as I now count down to 1. Final tendon relaxes, tension and anxiety fading completely away now as a wave of relaxation now begins to flow all over your body. Muscles in the cheeks relaxing now. Muscles around the eyes relaxing. Eyelids becoming very heavy as you sink deeper and deeper into a state of relaxation. That's right. Muscles in the neck and shoulders relaxing now. Your arms and hands relaxing. Your chest and stomach. Your hips, your legs, and finally your feet, until the whole body sits perfectly calm, perfectly relaxed. Now, any moment from now, I'm going to be suggesting to you pictures and images for you to create in your mind. And these pictures will represent and actually access their corresponding metaphoric structures in the deep unconscious mind. And during this process, I'm going to be asking you to shift and alter these images, and as the pictures shift and alter, so do the metaphoric structures of the deep unconscious mind also shift and alter. And this creates a corresponding change in your conscious mind and in the physical world in which you live. And to begin this process now, I would like you to imagine the image of a vast desert landscape. Perhaps you can see the occasional cactus and saltbush scattered here and there. Some low-lying mountain ranges on the horizon. Maybe you can hear the sounds of the desert. Hear some small animals scurrying, a gentle breeze, feel it blowing. And I'd like you to imagine that you can feel the rays of the sun beating down on you. It's empowering and invigorating, giving you life and strength. Now I would like you to walk forward in the desert, and as you walk, we are going to access one of your metaphors, and that is the metaphor known as the wolf, your hunter and protector. As the unconscious mind now accesses the metaphor of the wolf, it rises to the surface and appears in the desert sands. I want you now to ask your wolf to come up to you. And the first thing I'd like you to do is to check out the size of the wolf. Its head should be up to your waist. If it's too large, I'd like you to decrease its size. If it's too small, I'd like you to increase it. And as you adjust the size of your wolf, so will the internal wolf within you also adjust to normal, healthy proportions. Now, I would like you to look into the eyes of the wolf. I'd like you to notice its intense gaze. Feel its strength and wisdom. And as you and the wolf connect with each other in the desert sands, so do you also connect with the wolf metaphor within, as the unconscious mind continues to shift and alter each breath that you take, each sound that I make, allowing you to sink deeper and deeper and even deeper still. And now that you and the wolf have got to know each other, it's time for the wolf to go hunting, to gather food, to keep itself strong for the journey ahead. I want you to imagine that the wolf begins to sniff the ground until it gets the scent of fresh game. Follow the wolf to a small undergrowth of trees near the foothills in the desert. And as the wolf enters this undergrowth, I want the unconscious mind to access another metaphor, and that is the metaphor known as the rabbit. And in reverse speech, the rabbit symbolizes food for the wolf, or money in the physical world. And as the wolf catches and eats the rabbits in this journey, so too do you begin to manifest money and your needs in the physical world. Now I want you to watch as the wolf attacks the rabbit, rips it to pieces with its teeth, tasting its flesh and blood, feeling its primal instinct surging, eating the rabbit completely. And now it catches another rabbit and eats it, and yet another. And the more rabbits it eats, the more rabbits appear. And the unconscious mind processes this image very clearly and succinctly, now creating and manifesting this image into the world in which you live. And now, with the wolf satisfied, it is time to move forward in our journey. And now we're going to walk forward in the desert with the wolf by your side and access another metaphor. And this is the metaphor known as the eagle. And in reverse speech, the eagle represents our insight and intuition. The eagle acts as a scout for the wolf. I want the unconscious mind to access this metaphor now. As you see a large eagle soaring in the sky above, adjust its size so its wingspan is about 3 feet in width. Now raise your arm in the air and have the eagle come and land on your outstretched arm. Feel its talons in your skin. Look into its eyes and feel the magnitude of its vision. And as you connect with the eagle, so too do you connect to your own intuition, your ability to see ahead and scout the way before you. Now I want you to let the eagle soar in the sky. It flies ahead, and the wolf follows the eagle. And you look ahead, and you see the eagle flying towards a large garden that appears on the horizon. As the unconscious mind now accesses the metaphor of the Garden of Eden. And this garden represents the birthplace of consciousness, the passageway to the soul. We go to this place to find peace and fulfillment, to have contact with the universe and the divine, to connect to our real power and strength inside. And the eagle continues to fly ahead, finding safe passage through the desert for you and the wolf to travel. And as you do this, so too does your unconscious mind begin to transfer to the conscious mind the wisdom, knowledge, and ability that you need to travel your life's path and achieve the goals that you have set for yourself. And now you begin to approach the Garden of Eden. The eagle flies inside and lands on a tree, while you and the wolf leave the desert sands and walk inside. You are suddenly surrounded by a totally different world, a world of wonder and beauty. You see flowers and trees, and gentle rolling meadows and fields. You hear the birds singing. You continue to walk through the Garden of Eden until you come across the river of life. The state of the river represents the state of your emotional and physical energy. I want you to examine the flow of the river and see if there are any blockages anywhere. Clear those blockages and adjust the state of the river so it's flowing at a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow. And as the river flows smoothly, so too do your emotional states flow smoothly and calmly, allowing you clearness of mind and steadiness of purpose. And now you can pause by the river momentarily, perhaps even lie down with the wolf by your side and enjoy the nice peaceful atmosphere and feeling, and allow this state to remain with you long after this journey has finished. And now it's time to move to the final stage of our journey, and that is to travel to the whirlwind that resides at the very center of the Garden of Eden. As the unconscious mind now accesses the metaphor of the whirlwind, it rises to the surface now as you sink even deeper and deeper still, accessing some of the deepest parts of consciousness now. You walk towards the center of the garden and see the large white whirlwind spinning in the very center. This whirlwind represents your life force. I want you to adjust the rotation of the wind so that it spins from left to right, not spinning too fast, not too slow, just at a nice, gentle pace. Now, as you stand outside the wind, I want you to cup your hands, raise them towards the sun. You're now going to imagine that you're collecting a ball of sunlight in the palms of your cupped hands. As you collect the energy and life force of the sun, so too does the unconscious mind open this area of light that resides in the deep self, allowing its energy and power to be transferred to all parts of consciousness. And now, carefully cradling the ball of light in your hand, I want you to walk into the whirlwind itself. And you will find that you can walk into the twirling winds with perfect ease, through its powerful currents, right into the center of the whirlwind, where it is still and calm. I want you to release the ball of light out of your hands, and it rises into the air, and it fills the whirlwind with its power and light. Watch this light as it travels higher and higher in the wind, filling it completely with its light, so that the entire whirlwind glows and shines. And now I want you to imagine that the whirlwind begins to spin around you faster and faster, and as it spins, you begin to merge with the whirlwind, becoming one with the whirlwind. As the unconscious mind continues to shift and alter and process all these images very powerfully, clearly, and succinctly over the next few days and weeks. And now that you and the whirlwind are one, we've come to the end of this journey, and I'm going to bring you back to full awareness very shortly now. And the unconscious mind is going to process all these images that you've seen over the next few days and weeks, and make changes accordingly. And these changes will gradually filter out from the deepest part of your being, eventually affecting your conscious behavior and manifesting in your physical world. And so I'm now going to count slowly from 1 to 5 and gradually bring you back from this relaxed state to full awareness again. So on the count of 1, the pictures gradually begin to fade now. 2, the unconscious mind gradually returns to where it was. 3, breathing and heart rate gradually return to normal. 4, the conscious mind returns to full awareness. And 5, you can gradually begin to open your eyes now and return to the room wide awake and fully refreshed. Thank you. So, that is an example of the level of metawalk, of the first metawalk after the first couple of sessions. The sessions go, first session, then I analyse it for reversals. I feed back the reversals in the second session, and we discuss how the many sabotaging ideas, we're going to sort them out. The ideas coming from the client. I then analyse that, and so I have 2 sets of reversals. I weave them into metawalks, 2 metawalks. The second metawalk starts from where this one ends, starts under a lovely tree on the banks of the river of life. I take the client through a deeper state of relaxation. So those are the 2 metawalks. I then feed back the next session is the client feeding back to me what effect the process has had so far. I then analyse that and get a set of reversals. The next session, I feed those reversals back to the client, and we get another recording for me to analyse and get another set of reversals. From those 2 sets of reversals, I create the third metawalk, the final metawalk. And after that, the feedback from the client and and for me again, the analysis of the final feedback to feedback to the client and decide where the client decides then if they want to go on and do yet more. For most clients, one round is all that it takes. As you've heard with one of the clients, she knew that there was something really far deeper that she needed to address, and that was why she went on to do the next, the round again. and we really got to the heart of it. So, that is the process, that is the round. And that is, I mentioned at the start, it is a very expensive process, but it does involve me with hours of work. The process is £1,700, but if anybody from today is interested in working with me on this, I am prepared to take £300 off that. And so it would be £1,400. The other way that reverse speech is used is on single consultations. Single consultations where people don't want to achieve their life's goals, they just want answers to questions that they want to make the correct decisions. So they will come for one session. I'll feedback their reversals and we'll discuss what implications those reversals have for the decision they want to make. For instance, I was saying to somebody who was asking me about this in the break. A dress designer wanted to take her business up to, oh dear, if I say up to the next level, I'll sound like one of these dreadful coach. But, she wanted to progress her business and get into a different place. She had found an investor, but she wasn't sure whether she should go along with him. So she came to me for a consultation, a one-off consultation. It turned out that she was unhappy. Her reversals were very unhappy with the investor. He wanted too much of her business in return for not a lot. So we worked on that, and she phoned me up a week later and said, Ingrid, I don't know what we did, but I now have 3 investors who have sought me out and want to invest in my label. Seemingly magic happens, but as I've shown you, it isn't magic. It's the understanding of energy, and it's the collapsing of sabotage, which raises the person, the energy of the person, the soul of the person, if you like, to a much higher vibration, where they're only accessible to the good stuff.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
The structure of your consultations, it's all very precise and almost scientific. I mean, you are a scientist. Where does your intuition come in?
My intuition, that's playing all the time. As a background to what I'm doing, and my years of therapeutic experience, obviously, as well, are playing all the time. Because when people hear their own voice saying something that shocks or surprises them, they have to feel that it's safe to be shocked and surprised. And that's where my intuition and my therapeutic skill, my healing comes in. I don't need to use my intuition in terms of interpretation.
Yeah.
Because they tell me in the reversals. They tell me very clearly in the reversals. And so that's not necessary in terms of, in traditional terms of intuition. Intuition tends to rely on the life experience of the practitioner, and therefore is maybe more creative. But it could also, the flip side of that, it could be more to do with the practitioner than it is to do with the client.
Like transference.
Like transference, yes. This cuts through that,
Yeah.
cuts to the chase.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes.
Can I ask you a question? After that meditation, I saw two of you.
Really?
Honestly, standing there was two of them. Twice I've seen it.
Goodness. Wow. Can you describe the other one?
Just as you are, but
I'm not taking two home.
Two for the price of one.
Yes.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting.
Your etheric body, almost, your alter ego.
That's fantastic. Oh, I've never had that before. Thank you.
Any more
Can I
questions?
ask a question?
Yes.
You know, if there's this reverse therapy, then you have to have that machine that can reverse the conversation.
Oh yes, yes.
If you don't have it, then does it not work?
When David started out, he didn't have the software, and he did it all manually. 30 years ago, you know. He did it all the hard way. With this software, with this software, there are ways of varying the speeds. So if you pick up something that sounds like a word, you can go into it, you can slow it down and find out if there is a reversal there. And he's a very fierce trainer. He's taught us very strictly that there are, I think, 7 different criteria that make a proper reversal, rather than something that we think we'd like to make of it. And so it has to have a certain cadence, it has to have a beginning, a middle and an end, it has to not slur into gobbledygook, you know, and there are all sorts of...
Have you ever met somebody who doesn't reverse?
No.
It's just part of our nature.
It's part of us, yes, it's part of our consciousness.
Is there training for this?
Sorry?
Is there training?
Oh yes, yes, I'm a qualified trainer.
You are?
Yes, yes.
So
David is trained.
So to go back to this reversal, is where you listen to the conversation backwards, or whatever the client has been telling you backwards, and then you can slow the speed of the speech and pick up one word, or is it like a complete sentence? Because this is completely new to me.
If it's one word, I tend to reject it, unless it's a very, very significant word, because it could be just happenstance. If it's a word in context that makes sense,
That's where
then
your intuition comes in now.
no, this is where your acute training of hearing comes in.
At the beginning, do you ask the client the same set of questions to get us to chat? Do you have a format?
That's a good question. What I do is I go through the NLP form. Some of you here are NLP practitioners. I want to know how you see the goals that you've set yourself. I want you to tell me about the goals. So I'm using visual, I'm using auditory, and I'm asking you how you feel about the goals. So I'm using kinesthetic, because I'm wanting to get the main senses all working. Because once the auditory, the kinesthetic and the visual are all engaged for you, then you have far more chance of being fluent. And when you have far more chance of being fluent, you have far more chance of producing some really good rehearsals. You didn't know that, did you? You know, in our sessions I would start with Okay, what have you got to tell me?
That's
right. What I'm doing there is I'm keying into the sound. And you're thinking of it in terms of auditory. How do you see things coming out?
So it started very badly. Actually, but I like it to know better.
Yes.
Yeah, I've just looked up. There's an app called Reverse Speech, which has had 3.5, 2.5 out of 5 stars. And my question is, if you do it and find a reversal, can it be dangerous?
It can.
Can you deal with it,
Yes.
or do you need a professional to do it?
You really need a professional to deal with it. I've taken issue with David about that actually, because he's produced the, his access people to the thing, and I've said, it can upset a lot of people if they don't know what they're going to reveal to themselves. And he said he'd thought about that, but there were so many now, because this idea has become known, that people have put onto the market not very accurate apps and are profiting by it. And he didn't think that was fair, and he didn't think it was good. So he decided to put the app out there. But yes, it does come with a health warning, certainly.